the last episodes of Triumph Talks, I was able to interview Rory Londer, who overcame his drug addiction and went on to be highly successful, both as a businessman and as an advocate and mentor for others who are going through difficult times. His story is truly inspirational. I absolutely loved reading it and meeting him. But there's another person who gets a whole lot of credit for that book. Now, while it's his life and his inspiration that made the book possible, Should Have Been Dead was actually written by someone named Sweta Patel. If you watched that episode, then you know that I had plans to interview her and just learn about the process of writing Rory's story. So that's what we're doing today. Sweta Patel is a high school teacher at the Rochester Alternative Learning Center, Rochester, Minnesota, and helped write the life story of Rory Londer. Sweta met him when he came into her classroom as a motivational speaker. Many of her students have struggled with homelessness, addiction, and toxic relationships. Sweta could see how inspired they were by Rory's story as he shared about his own addiction to crack cocaine and living homeless right there in Rochester. He ended up buying the same laundromat he would rest in on cold nights and turned it into $1 million home improvement business. His message was, if he could turn his life around, so could they. When Rory was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer in 2020, Sweta Patel felt a pull to document his story. She started interviewing him in October 2021, and the following school year was granted a sabbatical leave to turn her notes into a book. Together, they officially launched Should Have Been Dead: Lessons from a Crack Addict Who Broke Free. Sweta, thank you so much for coming on Triumph Talks. After interviewing Rory and reading the book, I have been really looking forward to meeting you.
Thank you so much for having me.
So today on Triumph Talks, we'll be learning from you about the process of writing someone else's story. And there's something in your bio, though, I'd like to just start with and then dive into all your lesson plans because you're a teacher. So I know you're well prepared to teach us. I am in awe, first of all, of the inspiration that you had to approach him to write his book. My understanding is this is your first time to write a book. Is that right?
That is correct.
Wow. And then you actually, after all that time, you actually were able to take a sabbatical. Could you just talk a little bit about that? Just, I think it sort of sets us up for all that you have to teach.
Sure. So I had lots and lots of interview notes and video recordings after months of interviewing Rory, which I'll talk more in depth about in a little bit. But it was daunting to be able to tackle writing a book, given a young family and balancing work. So I was able to apply for a sabbatical leave, and they're very rare to get, given a lot of school districts are facing deficits and budget crises. But the superintendent and the sabbatical committee saw something special in what Rory and I were trying to do in giving students hope through the story, teaching teachers through Rory's story of how to work with adolescents who don't always have the most straightforward path. And they saw something special in there. And I was granted a sabbatical leave for one school year.
It's just a whole year. It just amazes me. And I know in talking with Rory, it was so clear that there's been divine intervention constantly throughout the process, from just meeting each other and having that opportunity to work with them, even how the cover came to be. And then your story really is at the end of the book. You included a lot about the kids that you work with and the responses that you would see. And I really do see the lessons that you learned being applied directly in your part of the book. And so, of course, that's you writing about you. And I just want to say I'm grateful that you put that in. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that before we dive into the how-tos of writing someone else's story?
Sure. So I didn't have a plan when I started out interviewing Rory. Like, everything just came together as it did, one step at a time. And I did decide to include an introduction where I share a little bit about myself and how it came to be that I was writing Rory's story and why Rory wasn't writing it himself, just so the reader can try to trust me as the narrator. But the afterword too, I think when people are thinking about writing someone else's story, they don't necessarily think about including their own journey in it, but I think it's important for readers to see the impact that this person had on the writer's own life. And I think by sharing that, um, readers can begin to connect some of the lessons and the themes to their own life after hearing how the writer was impacted by this person's story personally.
I agree with that
Mhm.
completely. I think that it's just part of the depth of his story, because his story is all about overcoming a very long, difficult drug addiction that affected his life so severely. But really, his story is also all of the triumph that came out of overcoming it, serving others, uplifting others. And those are those are very I don't know how to say this. Sometimes we say, "Oh, incredible, amazing," and it almost sounds like hyperbole, you know?
Mhm. Mhm.
And but to actually see how it's affecting people, then when you use those words, it becomes very, appropriate. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So,
Yes, it is.
yeah, so I think that your story validates all of I mean, of course, it's in his stories, we see the effects of his life on those around him, but it's about the ripple effect, because wow, his story, your work, your impact too, because he talked about you a lot in his episode at the right at the start, and how much you have really sacrificed. Maybe you don't see it that way. But I think that anybody looking at you, your skills, your abilities, your level of education, and the that you've chosen to serve the troubled youth in the high school when you could go on and do so many other things. And so you're very inspiring as well, and I'm very excited. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into the lesson plans that you have for us.
Mhm.
And I'm just going to let you lead the way and share with us the journey of writing Rory's story.
Okay. Well, I wanted to start with the ask. And I want to make it clear that this talk today, it's not directed towards professional ghostwriters who are actively recruiting clients. It's more for the person who's just living their life and they happen to come across someone whose story that sparks something in them, that makes them feel something, and they feel that urge to help document it. And so that was my journey. And I can just speak to my journey, but hopefully it inspires others to maybe jump on that feeling that they have that they're supposed to write someone else's story. So as you mentioned during the my bio reading, I did meet Rory in about 2018 or so. I was teaching a class, and again, I work at an alternative learning center. So many of my students face um, challenges with just educational failure year after year, chronic attendance issues, maybe substance use issues, um, pregnancy, lots of hurdles that they've gone through in their life or that they're currently going through. And so during my class, I wanted to bring in motivational speakers. I wanted them to leave with the message that they don't have to be where they are in life if that's not where they want to be. They can move from it. And Rory was one of those speakers that my colleague introduced me to. And the difference between Rory and all the other speakers that came in is that my students would reference his life story throughout the rest of the semester. I would hear about, well, Rory did it. Maybe I can too. Not maybe not in those words, but that was the sentiment that was left after Rory spoke to my students. And in 2020, when we moved to teaching from home with the pandemic and social distancing, I didn't want to let go of the motivational speaker part of my curriculum. And so when I asked Rory if he'd like to come and be a speaker via Google Meets, his assistant at the time actually messaged that, well, he was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And that really sat heavy with me because I knew everything he'd been through, years of addiction to crack cocaine and homelessness, um, you know, in and out of treatment centers and shelters. And he came out of all that to owning the same laundromat that he would rest in on cold nights. And he made it out of there and he built up that business into a home improvement business. He bought that same laundromat um, after years and years of hard work, only to be faced with this diagnosis. And I just felt the pull to help document his story. Like I didn't want it lost. But I didn't share that with anyone until months later. And that was my husband, that I felt that I had to do this. And then it was even later that I approached Rory about his interest in my writing his story. And he wrote back, "Yes, I think it's time." I'd say that when you feel that urge, I think before even asking the person if they're interested in your writing their life story, I would sit down and reflect on your inner why, because your inner why is what's going to help sustain your interest and your motivation in such a lengthy and difficult project. And so if you're overly concerned with the final product and having the book in hand or financial gain, I think that tends to set up some unrealistic expectations. It puts a lot of pressure on your shoulders to have a finished product. And instead, I would say that if your interest is more in the process, that you want to meet with this person, and it's going to take time. You're going to have to meet with them regularly, listen to their memories as they come, digging deep into someone else's life story. Like if that is where your joy and your interest and your passion lies, I'd say go for it. Um, and then if there's an agreement that the other person is interested in your writing their story, I think it's time to be a little upfront about what you each are going to bring to the partnership. In my case, I was very upfront with Rory and his wife, Lily, that I had absolutely no idea if there would even be an end product, but I was interested in the process. I was all in terms of meeting him and recording his memories and trying, but I could not promise an end product. And I was very fortunate that both Lily and his wife were very, very, very clear that they had absolutely no expectations of a finished product. So that really freed me of of any burden, of any pressure. And then I was just able to enjoy the process of just speaking with Rory.
Yeah, and I think he seems like someone who'd be fun to hang out with
Mhm.
on a pretty regular basis, and he had a lot of story to tell you, but it is a lot of work. I'm glad that you bring that up. I think it's important going into it when people do start. And that doesn't mean that every story has to be as expansive, because his really begins in youth all the way up through now. So you
Mhm.
actually covered a lot of his lifespan with that book. And so for those who are watching, you can definitely take shorter pieces of someone's life, maybe start there
Mhm.
and come back around and add more if you want to. Because sometimes there's just a certain event, maybe a historic event that somebody was a part of that you want to capture. But you really, I think what you wrote for Rory, and I hope that those who are watching, if they haven't read your book already, that they'll want to. I hope that they will want to read it to learn about Rory, but also if they are interested in helping somebody else with their story, they could read it just to watch how you put it together. And I know
Mhm.
that organization is going to be one of the next topics, or coming up topics.
Mhm.
So you start with the ask, just approaching someone, or perhaps you might be the one that's asked
Mhm.
to write it, in which case, either way, it's good to be able to just make sure you're on the same page about the expectations. I love that. So do you
Mhm.
want to move to the next point, that kind of once you have that agreement, what do you do next?
Yeah, so that's the fun part, the interviewing. So without the pressure of an end product, we just jumped into very genuine conversation. So I lugged my camcorder to his place of business at the time, Rory's Home Improvement, every Saturday morning for a couple of hours for months. And I recorded his story, and he would share memories as they came. And then during the week, after a day of teaching, I would transcribe the video recordings,
Mm,
kind of shorthand. So I would, on a Google Doc, write the date of the interview, the list of memories that he shared with a few details attached to each one. So then I could quickly reference the appropriate video recording file when I wanted to re-listen to certain memories. It just made the whole process easier.
I
And
have
that,
a picture. I have a picture of
oh
you
yeah,
doing this. Let me bring it up real quick. I think it'll be
sure.
fun since you're talking about it.
Mhm.
This is a Saturday morning that you're.
Yeah, so we started out at his home business, and then our friendship grew, and he and I started meeting in his house or at his house. And when it was nice, we would be on his porch. And so this was Rory's house right on the porch.
Love it. And you
Yeah.
also created a little montage of some of those interviews. I would say it looked like you had a lot of fun. There's a lot of laughing going on in those pictures.
There definitely was. And I would bring questions of my own to every interview too, genuine questions of things that I was personally interested in learning more. And then he would start by answering the questions, and then that would spark new memories in him. And then we just repeated that process. And then I have to say, then we expanded to his family and friend circle as well, people that he would reference in his memories. And I followed the same process with them. I'd bring questions based on some things that Rory shared, things I was genuinely interested in learning about. And they never felt like formal meetings at all. I was there to learn. And so, again, the focus on the process versus the end product. And then I would also just bring some of those lessons right back into my teaching in my classroom during the week.
Oh, really? That's
Yeah.
interesting. Could you go
Mhm.
into a little more detail about that?
Yeah. So, for example, during one meeting, Rory shared how people who are addicted or are homeless are really, really strong people. I know that's not the stereotype that's out there, but he explained, the strength that it takes to wake up every morning and maybe stand at a street corner asking people for change. It might be for a hit of something, it might be to buy alcohol. It might not be for what's good, but the strength nonetheless is still inside of them. And it's a matter of reminding them of that when it comes time to, their recovery conversations that, yes,
Mm.
they can do this. Look at what you've already been through. You can turn your life around. If you can stand at a street corner, you can do this. You can go to a meeting, for example. And so during the week, I would actually look for opportunities with my students, especially when they felt they couldn't do something or if something was hard. I would go back and I would tell them, look at everything you've already survived, that you're still surviving. You can do this. I mean, you woke up this morning and you came to school. That's a start. That's impressive to me. So again, the student population that I work with, they're just such resilient kiddos who
Mm.
have gone through a lot at a very young age. And so Rory just kind of reminded me that to take a moment and remind them of what they've already been through and what they can survive and overcome.
What a remarkable experience, both to hear his
Mhm.
stories and then to be able to just immediately apply them and
Mhm.
see their impact. You know what? That's got to have a lot to do with why the book turned out so well. Just that, like you said, it's not so much about getting to that finish line as the
Mhm.
process of taking his lessons and seeing the effect. And your writing is so amazing. I want to ask you, when you interviewed him, so you have him on camera, how much of the end product were direct quotes from him that you just took from the interview and the camera, or did you have to do a lot of? I'm asking because I'm a writer too.
Mhm.
How much did you need to sort of massage it so that it would be? I don't know what I'm trying to say, but more. Sometimes when we just speak, we're very casual. In
Mhm.
writing, we tend to make it a little sharper, I guess is what
Mhm.
I'm asking. Did you change a lot of what he had to say, um, or because it's just some of the phrases are remarkable, so or a mix, I'm sure, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Sometimes I think about that too, and now it feels like years ago that I did that, even though it was just a year or two ago that I was sitting at the computer. And I wish I could give a percentage, but I mean, if I had to ballpark it, maybe 60 to 70% would have been his own words, and then 30 to 40% or so would have been my filling details in.
Yeah.
Because it's hard. Like when you're writing someone else's story, and this is also a great segue to my next section,
Oh,
which
good.
is organizing and writing. Because when you're writing someone else's story, you haven't lived through those experiences, so it's difficult to provide details if the person who lived them hasn't provided them. It
Yeah.
doesn't feel authentic. And so I'd say the writer's job is really to keep going back. Like if you feel like there's gaps in the details, go back and re-interview,
Mhm.
push your subject on some of those details so it still continues to feel authentic. And of course, there
Mhm.
there are going to be moments where you're just going to have to fill in the details as the writer as they make the most sense.
Yeah, I love that. I
Yeah.
can see why it took you 2.5 years
Yeah,
because that's
it
a good long time, actually. It's a good long book with a lot covered, and yeah, you. One of the things I was saying when I was interviewing Rory was, and we were talking about you, was how well you were able to capture his spirit, his personality, his thought processes, and so I think that really does show the level of attention that you gave every part of his story, and I'm sure the interview process. So was that a good segue into your next topic, or do you have anything more to share about interviewing?
I still I wanted to continue on to the
Good.
organizing and writing part. And so when I was in college and high school, whenever I had to write anything, I would need all of the notes in front of me. I needed to see everything all at once and then wait for a pattern or a pattern of organization to emerge from it. And until then, I couldn't think about structure at all. I just needed to see it all in front of me. And so it was the same for this book too. I So the process that I took was I went through the most memorable scenes. I re-listened to all the audio recordings and then I fleshed them out into longer scenes and filled in some details by re-interviewing Rory or just from my own mind where things made sense. And then I tried to figure out the best pattern of organization. So now I had all of these scenes in front of me. I would copy and paste and reorder, but nothing came to me as far as the structure went. I didn't want it to be chronological. Chronological is boring to me. I wanted the structure to be meaningful. And so then I put in all the scene titles onto flashcards and then tried to rearrange them physically on my basement carpet, trying to figure out some pattern of organization.
It's so true to be able to break it down, and I am with you. I'm not a big fan of chronological either. I like
Yeah,
to be able to jump around in time and sort of build on themes, which is what you did. So,
I did. And so
yeah.
I was actually standing um, at a beach near my parents' home during winter break with my kiddos, and that's I'd been thinking about it for so long. I think my brain just I don't know like an aha moment for me standing on that beach that I wanted to organize this book by the lessons I had personally taken away. There would be words and phrases
Mhm.
that I would just repeat to myself, things
Mm.
that Rory said. For example, one of the chapter titles now is I wish I had my book in front of me right now. But,
I've got it.
um,
I've got it.
oh,
I can
okay. All right. Maybe you could
Right
read a
over here. I
few
have it on my
chapters.
bookshelf over there. So,
Perfect.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
the titles of your chapters are really the main lesson points, and to just read the table of contents gives so much. So I'm just going to read some of them, and then I think you're looking for one in particular. So just stop me when I get there.
Okay.
um, so this just shows how you were able to organize the book very much thematically, with it being the lessons. So one of them is the person who needs it most, we have to love the hardest. If you weren't thinking about yourself so much, maybe things wouldn't be so bad. I love
That's
that
one of
one.
my favorites.
That is
Yeah.
one of my, and the
Yeah.
stories in there, just the tough love and the outcomes are amazing. And he
Mhm.
talked about that too in our interview. He talked about how he took Thanksgiving, which was a hard holiday for him, and stopped thinking about himself and just went out and served people. And he's a chef, and so he brought them food. And
Mhm.
it's a wonderful tradition to this day. Love that. I want to do that. I'm not a chef. In fact, I'm a terrible cook, but I'm like, that's it. Because I'm an empty nester.
Mhm.
And I don't know if I'm gonna have anybody at my home for Thanksgiving. I want to go out and do what he did. Anyway, sorry. But see, this is how his lessons spin into our applications. So like that's
Mhm.
something I took from the book.
Yes.
Um, what's your heart saying you should do? Pull back your hood and be a part of Say Yes.
Yes.
Ah, love that.
Mhm.
Trust we're all doing the best we can with what we got and what we know. Got a dream? Go. I'll hold the door for you.
And I
You
said that
can't-
one a lot to myself during writing this book.
Oh, and okay.
You
So is
have
that
a
the one you're
dream, you
looking
gotta
for?
get up and work for it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I bet. And that's a mantra right there. I love
Mhm.
that. That's the kind of thing you could write on a piece of paper and tape it to your mirror to read every morning.
Yep.
Just got a dream, go. I'll hold the
Mhm.
door for you. I love that. So supportive too.
Mhm.
You can, I'll show you. You bopping your head up and down again? Why don't you look at people?
Mhm.
Love it. Got a choice to make? Just play the story out. That was one of my favorites, actually. That
Mhm.
was one I pulled when I talked to him. The idea of just thinking things through the whole way as you're making a decision. That
Mhm.
is powerful, powerful. Keep your side of the street clean. How will you spend the time you got left? That's about when you start knowing that he
Mhm.
had cancer. It's amazing what he's been through. Let the good things you do define you. Love that. I pulled that one out too when I was talking to him.
Mhm.
Um, and then Rory's letter to the person struggling with addiction. I guess I was calling what you wrote as an epilogue, but it's an afterword. I see that now.
Mhm. Yes, yeah,
But
that's it.
yeah, love it. So yeah, you organized it through all of the themes of
Mhm.
lessons. And how
Yeah.
did you change? Talking about lessons, how did it affect you from start to finish, having these lessons swirling around your head this whole time?
Yeah, I'd say in my work life, it helped me to really connect with my students. What it means to have a genuine relationship and connection with someone, lowering your walls, being vulnerable, seeing someone eye to eye. And these are all traits that Rory has when he relates to other people and converses with other people. And I carried that through in my personal life as well. And it just deepened my friendships and relationships with people. We're just able to be more genuine and more authentic. But also, like just working with Rory, it just helped me to build confidence in myself too, and just say yes to opportunities instead of shying away from them or feeling embarrassed or feeling insecure or feeling like I wouldn't fit in, just saying yes and seeing where things go. Because I think a huge part of Rory's recovery was saying yes to experiences like going out and going to a park, going bowling, meeting people he met through recovery for lunch, and just getting out of your own head because sometimes our negative thinking, negative mindset could pull us down. But when we're out and about relating with other people out in the world, you know, that negativity kind of just vanishes, and you're able to take some steps forward. And so I'd say it just helped me to really build confidence in myself and relate to people a lot better.
Well, I think you should be very confident in your skills as a writer. I don't know if this has sparked a desire to continue writing, or if it was just a big sort of adventure that you wouldn't have the time to go on again. But how has that? What do you think will be the outcome of your experience writing? Do you want to keep doing it, or?
I loved it. I had forgotten how much I missed writing. I mean, I never wrote professionally, but just in high school and college, just writing papers. I used to love that. And then, you get into teaching and you're teaching students how to read critically and write, and it kind of, falls away a little bit for your own self. But I just love being immersed in a writing project. And
Yeah.
it's challenging. Like you write, you seek feedback from people, and I sought feedback from Rory, his family, his friends, my colleagues. You take that feedback and you have to go back and revise and edit and decide what to change. So I mean, you're really in this project heavily, big picture, but then also drill down to the detail. And that it comes down to your why again. If you have a strong why as to why you've taken this project on, I think that's what will carry you through to the finish line and
Yeah.
keeping you going.
Yeah. It's really it is a labor of love for sure, but I know sometimes the hard things are just it's a wonderful adventure. It really
Mhm.
is, getting to know him so well.
I agree.
So you talked about organizing and
Mhm.
how you chose to do it thematically,
Mhm.
and you had all these uh, papers or sticky notes on the floor.
Mhm.
So how did you decide? I just want this visual. How did you move things around, and what changes did you make in that process from when you began the project till until the end?
So before that day on the beach, I really just had a series of scenes in front of me with no pattern of organization. But once I realized that I wanted to organize this book according to these 12 lessons that really stuck with me, I was able to use those as my chapter titles. And then I filled in the scenes as they made sense under each lesson. And so then now every lesson, every chapter title had a list of memories underneath it. And I wrote a first draft. After that, it came really quickly to me. I'd wake up at 4 in the morning, or sometimes I'd go to bed at 2 in the morning. But I eventually had a draft that I was able to send to an editor that I found on Readsy Marketplace, who was able to do a developmental edit for me, which is big picture editing. Like, do all the scenes under a chapter make sense? Are all the chapters in the right order? And she had a lot of great feedback for me. And the way the first draft looks and the way the completed the book looks, it's very different. I'd say for me, the timeline um, was the most difficult for me to represent in writing when it wasn't chronological. I wanted it to make sense to people, and it's not perfect. But I think the lessons kind of transcend that a little bit. So even though it's like in and out, past, present, future, throughout the book, I think the lessons still come through to the reader.
Definitely, and it is challenging to write that way. I think that's what I love about a thematic organization versus chronological, is
Mhm.
it's just higher level. Chronological is very simple, and
Mhm.
that's okay for anybody that might be writing that way. There's
Mhm.
definitely places where that's appropriate, um, but that's fascinating. I'm glad that you shared that you reached out to a developmental editor, because I do believe that getting other eyes on it can help when you're writing. Sometimes we get this tunnel vision where we know what we're saying and we know
Mhm.
how things fit together, but sometimes the readers might not flow with us. But uh, you must have found an exceptional one for that as well, because it really does go together. You shared with me a video that was taken that I'd like to play that just shows the conversation that you were having with Rory at one point, where you were just trying to figure out the order of things, which I think goes to show how important that order and that structure really is.
Mhm.
So I'm going to play that now.
Okay. So after your true sobriety date, which was August 18th, 2005.
Yep.
So let's take that date. And then you went on to get the driver's license with Indian Mike. And then he became your sponsor. To get your driver's license, you had to have like a signed card that you've been going to AA
Right, so
for a year,
that was
right?
the first, so I got my license actually back on the first 3 years, before Mexico.
Oh.
That's Indian Mike, yeah. Yeah, no, that was in the early days, because I was
Okay.
driving all through those years, and I had a truck, lost one, whatever.
Okay.
I first got my license back in those first couple of years I showed up. I rode that Rochester Centurion, I
Yeah.
showed that shirt.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years went by, year 2 or 3, dating Marshall Lindquist,
Yeah.
riding around on my bike still, and then
Yeah.
he took me up. So way back in, when was Mexico?
2003.
Yeah, so in 2002 probably.
Okay.
I love that video. It shows just we watched you have a light bulb moment there, and you're like, oh, and it just gives us a feel for the process. It's kind of like you got to be a fly on the wall in that moment of you sitting there in the kitchen, just trying to figure out how things come together. And so, fits really well in the topic that we're discussing right now when it comes to
Yeah.
organizing and um,
I think
structure.
it really speaks to the whole process that it's not just the initial interview. It's going to be going back and getting more details or establishing the timeline a little bit better. Because at the very end, if it comes out to be a final finished book, then you want it to be the most, truthful account that you can present to readers. And that's going to take questioning, double checking, so it takes time.
Yeah, you are a great model of that, and we
Yeah.
get a little bit of a sneak peek, or not sneak peek, but
Behind the scenes.
we get to watch you in your process that you're talking about now, and I love that.
Mhm.
So you wrote an introduction and an afterword, and would you like to talk about that? I assume you wrote both of them after the book writing process happened.
So I actually started the introduction early on because it provided the context of how I met Rory and why I decided to write his story and why he himself didn't write the story, and which is because he's a very slow typer, and his skill is just being very verbal and having conversation. So he was able to do that and then trust me to help shape and organize and write his story. And then the afterword, as I mentioned, I don't think that writers should shy away from including their own stories in the book. And so the afterword is very heavily focused on how I apply the lessons that I learned from Rory's story to my own teaching and personal life.
That's interesting. I can definitely see where writing the introduction at the beginning was sort of like being able to articulate your why that you could go back to. I know with myself, I often write introductions sort of at the end of it all, because then I know what it is I want to highlight for the reader to watch for, kind of like a hook. Um,
Mhm.
but in this case, I can see where that really would serve a great purpose, especially when you're spending 2.5 years in depth, just to have that to go back to. And then the afterword, I have a collection of stories. It's just called the Triumph Book. The first one, it ended up being a series. I have one of veteran stories and one of people who are disabled, and they're all first person stories. In some cases I wrote it for them,
Mhm.
but what I ended up doing, just to kind of interject an idea, is I ended up writing something called Behind This Story. So at the end of each chapter is a different story. And at the end, I would just write how I met the person, if there was a nonprofit or that supported them or something they were involved in. In every case, the point that was made is that whatever their tragedy, they found a way to serve others with it. And that's how they healed. And so I would share what they were doing. And so that was just kind of my way of being able to be a part of, because I like the word journey. It really is a journey, and your journey of writing Rory's story is the theme of this. And it kind of showed my journey, and sometimes it would show how I got to meet that person and how I met that person. And sometimes it was a trail of breadcrumbs, from one to the next to the next. And so I look at it as a story within the stories. And
Okay.
and I really love that about your afterward, because we really do get to see the work that you do with the youth, and the response that they had, and get to know them a little bit. And so,
So the way I did organize the afterword, that was chronological. And so I
mm,
actually build in Rory's voice too in italics within the afterword whenever he said something along the journey of interviewing him. I'd share some of those words and then how I immediately applied it to my teaching at that time. And then it takes you through the sabbatical leave and how I transitioned to using those lessons outside of the classroom as well.
yeah, that's really good. I'm glad you
Mhm.
pointed that out too. That's a place where the chronological was the best
Mhm.
order to use for that. And I'm sure. So, did you work on that at the end of it all, or was that something you were kind of developing alongside of this story? I'm just curious.
I developed it alongside of
Mm,
it. So I had
mhm.
the book, and then the afterword was at the very end where as I would remember where I had applied some of the lessons, I would build that into the afterword.
Mm.
And it was later that I ordered it chronologically. It was just kind of a space to house some of my own memories of how Rory's story and life impacted mine.
Yeah, it's really it was a great addition. I can't even imagine the book without it,
Oh, thank
honestly.
you.
So the writing process, you did it through videotaping and then transcribing and then working through that. Um, when you transcribed the video, did you actually just sit and listen to it and type it as you or keyboard it as you do we use the word type anymore? I don't know.
Mhm.
I'm from the
Yeah.
I learned on a typewriter. It was electric, but still.
So
um,
during my initial interviews, I would just do very shorthand notes, just list the memories and a few details to help me reference them later. But when I started writing, the summer of 2022, when I started, I re-listened to all of them, and then I did word for word transcribing of the memories that meant the most to me. But then at the
mm.
same time, I was building the scenes too, and so then I would fill in gaps with some of my own words right there on the
So
spot.
you didn't sit there and try to type out everything he said and work from
Mhm.
that. You listened to it and said, "Okay, I like that the way he told that story, and now we're gonna build around." I love that. Okay, that's
Yes,
really helpful because
yes.
I suspect there's gonna be a lot of people who will watch this who
Mhm.
have a father, grandfather, or someone that they wanna help preserve their story, and they're gonna wanna know exactly how you did it, and we definitely don't want them working harder than
Right,
they have to. So
right, right.
that's a good way to do it, and thankfully, the technology is there that it's so easy to record, and I would add there's a lot of ways to just take a video or take an audio, and it can just instantly be transcribed for you too. I
I
mean,
think so too. I think
mhm,
I looked into it, but some of the pricing options were a little
mhm.
pricier, or that I tried it, but my audio equipment wasn't the best. And so sometimes
Oh, interesting.
like, the AC would kick on and the program couldn't pick up on what Rory was saying. So
Okay.
if a person is going that route, like having
Yeah.
better equipment and a good space
Yeah.
to
I
listen to.
suspect though that being able to just listen to it and pick out what you want will
Mhm.
still be less labor intensive even if you had it all transcribed and worked from it, just
Mhm.
because it can be a lot of massaging to try to pull
Yeah.
out what you don't want, and, just to be able to hear it and go, I know how I want to put that together. Of course, being a writer, it helps to be a
Mhm.
writer to have that skill.
Mhm.
Um, and so, for those who maybe are daunted by this, maybe don't feel like a natural writer, you could
Mhm.
definitely use that process,
Mhm.
and then find a good editor to help you know
Right.
what belongs and what doesn't belong.
Right.
Um, so you wrote and you hired. So did you hire any? Did you have other editors besides a development editor?
So I
Um,
use my colleagues,
okay,
Rory's wife and daughter, as my beta reader team as well, my street editing team. And so
love
they
it.
really help me in between the
Yeah,
professional editing. So the professional editor did the developmental edit and then my line by line copy editing when I felt the manuscript was pretty close to being done.
yeah, that's great. So how many beta readers did you have? It was primarily his
So my
family.
initial beta reader team after the developmental edit was about 5 or so,
Mhm.
5 or 6. And then after the developmental edit, I think I had another 6
Wow.
colleagues read it. Yeah.
Okay, so you sent it through a lot of people. Now,
Mhm.
just since we're talking about processes here, what was the process of obtaining their feedback and incorporating it into, because I'm certain you didn't wanna have them actually make the changes in the manuscript, and now you've got 6 different versions of, the story. I'm just assuming. So
So I printed them at Office Max and I bound them for all the beta readers, and I did have them write in the margins things like I had a little cheat sheet for them to follow, like where are you confused, or what are you wondering about more in this section, or do you feel like this and there are any scenes in this chapter that don't quite fit, that kind of feedback. And I actually did go through each person's book and then decide if I wanted to utilize this feedback or hold off on it, and so making those decisions. But it is hard. You have like 9 or so people's feedback, and then you're trying to, and there might be some conflicting feedback that you get too, and then you just have to make decisions as the writer. But when something comes up over and over again, you know that probably needs to be looked at and reworked and changed.
Oh, that's really good to know. Because I know sometimes we just will send out a PDF to somebody, and
Mhm.
that's where or a Word if they're working it. So to actually print them and send them out and use, but yeah,
Mhm.
that's a lot of page turning to go through that many. It just goes to show the attention to detail, though, and
Mhm.
it comes out in the final product. And let me just interject here. I know we're going to talk in, I guess, the next topic about self-publishing, but I think it's fitting here. Self-publishing. There's a lot of misconception around the word self-publishing, and it's wonderful that we can choose to publish a book. You didn't have to find an agent. You didn't
Mhm.
have to hope that a big publishing company would see the value of Rory Story. You're able to go right ahead with it and publish it. And of course, I guess this is sort of setting up a segue. I don't know if we're ready to jump to it.
Mhm.
But one thing that I see is because there's no gatekeepers, there's a lot of people self-publishing.
Mhm.
And my caution is that too often people take the word self super literal, meaning
Mhm.
they feel like they got to do everything themselves. And sometimes they're in a rush.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of very potentially great books, I'm going to call them that
Mhm.
are really low quality,
Mhm.
really low quality. And so I think it's a disservice to all self-published or all indie. I like to use the word indie because it gets away from the idea that yourself, just independent, but you can still get people to help you. I
Yeah.
think it's a disservice because sometimes it can create a stigma that people say,
Mhm.
oh, well, that's a self-published book, so it's not going to be as good as a traditionally published book. It's going to have low quality.
Mhm.
So for those that are watching, if you are considering publishing a book, and I hope that you will, please do follow
Sweta.
Sweeta's example and take the time and let people help you perfect it, because yes, it can be a great story, but the quality of the writing and the attention to removing errors or making it flow well, it matters. It really matters.
Mhm. I would say really utilize your beta reader and street editing team as well.
Mhm.
Um, People that you feel would be in your audience group once the book is finished. Reach out to them to see if they would be willing to provide feedback, and then I would say give it to a professional editor and
Yeah.
hire a cover designer. I think when people are searching for books, they see the cover, which leads them to the back blurb, which leads them to the table of
Mhm.
contents, which leads them to, the first pages. And then you hope that they stick with it and like what they're reading. But the
I can't
interior
agree with you
format.
more. That's the other place where you can really spot a self-published book
Mhm.
because people think that they can do it all. They think they can go into some of this software and just design their own cover, and they don't know the rules of design, and it's clear.
Yeah.
And people do judge a book by its cover, and rightfully so, because if you see a cover that looks really low quality, you're not going to probably spend the time to read it,
Mhm.
because our time is valuable. So I agree. I think it's wonderful that you. And let's talk about that if you don't mind while we're on the topic. I'm going to bring up the cover and just share with me the process of getting this cover designed.
Oh my goodness, I'm so proud of how this cover turned out. So I was able to find David Prendergast from Ireland on Readsy Marketplace too, the same online database that I found the editor through. And I provided some passages that I really liked in the book. And then he used those passages to create a couple of different covers. And this was one image that he had. And I just love the laundromat. I love the hooded figure, because I think one of the quoted passages I sent to him was how we should all pull our hood back and look up and, live. And so he has that. He has, you know, the garbage bag, like representing Rory when he was homeless, but also the image of hope too, with the sunrise, with the image of the sun through the window, and he's walking towards it, or at least looking in that direction.
It's a brilliant cover.
Yeah.
I love it. It really does stand out um, as something representing a high quality book. Um, that is fascinating to hear that you actually sent the designer excerpts from the book, so he was drawing from the actual input or the
Mhm.
actual content. That is neat. I love that. And that person is very talented. What's his name again? Let's give him a little nod.
His name is David Prendergast
Wow, that's
on Reedsy Marketplace. Mhm.
yes, he's great. So I guess that sort of did segue us into your final point, which is talking about self-publishing and all of the decisions that you made. So not to rush you into it, but it kind of was a
Yeah.
natural outcropping of what we're talking about. Did you have anything more you wanted to say about the writing process before we moved into that point?
No, I think we're ready to move into
Okay.
the published work.
So a lot of decisions had to be made. Did you form an LLC with Rory for the book, or how did
Yeah.
you structure that?
So once we decided we were going to self-publish, we had to create an imprint name. And so we both love water. And so we just came up with Booksplash Publishing as our imprint name, and that's our LLC as well. When we finally realized that we are going to have a finished product on our hands, we had to make some of the practical decisions around our partnership. And so we are 50-50 partners. So we shared 50% of the expenses as well as the royalties. And we also had to decide how we were going to make decisions. And for the most part, we made decisions together. But then there were times where Rory just trusted me to make decisions as well. So some things that we had to decide on were the cover designer, the final cover, the title, the look of the interior pages, the way the chapter titles are laid out. And we looked at lots of sample books to decide all of that as well. And right now, our primary focus is marketing, and that's the same too. So Rory kind of handles the in-person events, speaking at treatment centers and recovery groups and prisons. And then my kind of responsibility with marketing is more the back end, the online stuff, the social media and writing blogs and responding to readers. And it's a lot of work, but it's nice to have a partner in the process too.
Yeah, it sounded in my interview with him like he wasn't very decisive. He just wanted to let you
Yeah.
have it, and he loved the service that you gave him. And so I guess that makes it. Sometimes you're like, no, I want your opinion. You need to help
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice too to be able to just make the decisions.
Yes.
So, but you
Yeah.
clearly made some very good decisions, and that's interesting. You looked at other books for the formatting of the interior because there really are a lot of different options. So, do you remember some of the details that you decided on for your book that you could describe?
For the interior
Mhm.
formatting, so we
Yeah.
wanted the lessons to really stick out. And so we actually have those chapter titles on their own individual pages. And then when you flip the page, the
Mhm.
chapter starts on that right side.
Wow.
The little decoration, so there's like a little swirly line under the chapter titles. We had to decide on the phrase that would go on the top margins of the book. And so I think we have the title on one side and then the book chapter title on the other
Yeah.
side. I think formatting the discussion questions at the end, that was a lot of work
Oh,
as well.
I am so glad that you brought that up. I can't believe I didn't have that in my list of objectives for a call. Yes, you did that. You broke out each chapter and provided questions. And are you seeing that being put to use?
Heard from a few readers. So I have two sections in the book. One is a list of 10 questions for book club discussions. And I've been a part of a few different book club discussions who did use those questions. So that felt nice. As far
Yeah.
as the in-depth questions, chapter by chapter, I think my end hope or dream is that one day the book will be used in English classrooms by teachers who could probably utilize some of those questions a little bit more. But yeah, there have been a couple of people who have said that they've appreciated the question, so that made me happy.
That's the teacher in you.
Yes,
Definitely
it is.
coming
Yes.
out, and it's
Yes.
unique. I have seen books put the book club questions in, but the way that you broke it out, you really did turn it into, I wouldn't call it a textbook per se, but it definitely could be utilized more that way, which I think the kids who use it would love it. What a great curriculum. What a great curriculum to have. So talk about receiving the first book. I have a picture of it. Let me bring it up. I'd love to hear about this day.
Oh, this was really exciting. I think my family and I, we were returning from a trip somewhere. It was late at night, but Rory and I were really excited to open this package, and he waited for me to come back from the trip, and then he came over that same evening, and my husband took pictures and recorded us. But just the feeling of holding a book that you've written, that is like a feeling that it's priceless, to know that you've put something together, after all this time, 2.5 years of effort, and into something that looks like a book, that you can hold in your hands. That was special.
Oh my gosh.
Boom. And look how shiny that is. That is really beautiful. Good. I think I love it.
I love it too.
I know Rory described it. It was almost like he was holding a baby. He's like, I smelled it. I kissed it.
Yes, he really did.
It's a joyful moment. It is.
I have one more thing to say. I would say that while I was writing the story and it seemed like it was going to become a book, I read somewhere that marketing takes as much work as writing it does. So if writing took all of this effort, marketing it so that it can get in front of readers is equally a job. So again, it's nice to have a partner who's, he does the in-person speaking, I do the online, but it takes a commitment. So he and I decided that we were going to give it a full year. So until January of 2025. And then we were going to reflect, do we want to keep pushing ourselves to continue to market, or do we want to kind of pause and take a step back and see what happens? But for now, we're all in. We both are. And we get messages almost every day from people who have connected with the book. From all over, people who might be in treatment centers or writing from prison. A lot of parents have messaged us about their adult children who have issues with addiction, and how the book has given them hope, and I think that's what fuels Rory and me. Like this, that's our why right now for marketing. We had a different why when we were writing the book, and now our why are like these messages that we get from our readers.
It's interesting how things evolve. And and I'm really glad that you point out how much work marketing is. So often writers will feel like the hard work was the writing and the editing, and you got your book and it's in your hands, and now you just want to breathe and relax and take that moment. But definitely marketing, I'd say for some it's more work. And I think maybe that's because unless you have a knack for marketing, if you're writing a book, you're probably someone who enjoys writing, or you wouldn't go to the effort of publishing a book. So you're doing something that, while it's a lot of work, you enjoy it. But a lot of writers are not natural marketers. And so you're having to do something that doesn't come as naturally. And to be honest, it can be very challenging, especially when you're in a world where anybody can be an author now, which I love that there's no gatekeepers. You can decide, but at the same time, the pond is very large and there's a lot of fish in it. So I know that you have had a lot of success. It sounded like just since Rory said you've sold 4,000 copies, and it's been 7 months. That's really good. And I know there's momentum happens too, because as people read it, then they recommend it, and then more people read it, and it's going to snowball and get easier, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And that's remarkable. And I'm sure I have a lot of faith. So I think that what you're doing was definitely divinely led, and our lives have purpose and meaning. And so what specifically have you been doing to be able to reach 4,000 readers?
I would say for Rory and I together, we did a lot of local news. Our local newspaper, our local ABC, NBC, CBS, our local media was very, very supportive of us. And so that really started the momentum on this book, I would say, early on. And then it's really honestly been a lot of word of mouth to get speaking engagements for Rory. So someone might be in the audience who might say, oh, I have a friend who's part of this organization who would love to have you speak. And so he's been kind of fielding all of those requests and doing maybe 2 to 3 different speaking engagements a week, most weeks. And then on my end, Facebook ads and Amazon ads have been great. Our Facebook ad that we have that's been pretty popular, I think it has about 3,300 or so likes on it and 500 shares. I mean, I think that's about as viral as I'm going to get, but that has really helped spread awareness of the book to people's personal circles as well. Yeah.
That's really good.
Mhm.
Have you, I'm just bringing this up because
Yeah.
I believe that the reason, well, let me put it, the reason I started this channel is because I believe that YouTube and video is a platform that has tremendous potential, because we can reach tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions all around the world. So I'm really glad that you came on my show, because I want to use that potential to help you. Have you ever considered maybe starting a channel and letting Rory's inspiration and yours be available through that platform? I'm just curious if you've thought about it.
So we actually do have a YouTube channel. I think it's just Should Have Been Dead.
Okay.
Book maybe. I can't remember the specific channel, but I think it's at Should Have Been Dead. And then I just post, I kind of repeat some of the content. And so for our blog posts, it's actually Rory does a 2-minute video and then I write an article about it. And so I have all of those videos that are uploaded. But when it comes to marketing, I think for my own personal sanity, like I think I had to choose one that I knew I'd be able to consistently post on. And my favorite for myself is Facebook. And so that's where I do a lot of my posts. And then Instagram has kind of repeated content and YouTube has repeated content. But yeah, I would love to expand our channel and focus more on it. But I think for now it's Facebook.
Well, I'm going to encourage you to do that, because I believe, my philosophy is that I think that the greatest marketing opportunity for authors is YouTube. There's so much connection that happens when you hear and see and feel the spirit of someone. And for those who have important messages and lessons, I really, I believe that the best effort you can make is on this platform. Of course, it takes time to be discovered, and it's a lot of work, just like writing a book. But I think it would be really great to see your channel grow in its content and in its followers, because you have such an incredible message that's impacting those that get to hear Rory. And you could even put clips from his speaking on it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm going to encourage that, because it's something I'm really going to start doing with the authors that I work with, is helping them to establish a channel if that's something they're interested in, because I really do believe there's the potential for reaching people. If you think about it, YouTube is a search engine. Every other social media platform, you can, once you put it up, it sort of goes down, through the chronology of new posts. But if somebody's searching, how do I overcome addiction? Now they pull up your video. So you're constantly reaching people instead of being buried. and it's owned by Google, that's the #1 search engine. So just from that standpoint, your ability to be discovered is really, really high. And I think you'd have a lot of success if you put the effort in. And I will be more than happy to mentor you any way that I can if you want to know more about that. So
Yeah, I might take you in it.
I would love to help you, and I'd love to have you come back if there's anything else you want to teach and related to writing, publishing, marketing. If down the road you have some maybe an outline of where you're at, like when you hit your year mark and you do your review and you assess where you're going, it might be interesting to learn about that process and how you assessed your first year and where the weaknesses were and where the strengths were. I think that would be really interesting to learn about if you're willing to share that as well. So
Sure.
well, thank you
January
so much.
Yeah.
What's that?
I said January 2025. That's when we're going to do the reflection.
Love it. All right. I'll be thinking about that. January
Okay.
be watching for that. But yeah, reach out to me. Of course, I hope that we stay in touch between now and then. And I really would love to see more people learn about his story. I just think it's for everyone. It's definitely not just for at-risk youth or people who are dealing with addictions. It's the lessons that you capture are that's just wisdom we all need. So
Thank you so much. I appreciate your having me. This was a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
It has been. I have. You and Rory, I appreciate all that you have done, and you've affected me for sure.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much, Melanie.